Imagine finding yourself suspended upside down in a vast dark cave, where even your breaths echo against the cold, wet rocks. Time feels eternal here, with the unrelenting darkness closing in, making any chance of freedom seem like a mere illusion. Things take a turn for the worse, and all you're left with is to pray for your safe return to your family and friends. This is Fatal Tragedies, with the story of the most tragic cave-exploring deaths in human history. Coming up first is the story of Joe Ivy and Tim Stitch. What began as an adrenaline-fueled pursuit of discovery transformed into a harrowing tale of innovation, challenges, and a devastating twist. Joe started exploring caves with the San Antonio Grotto when he was just 16. Despite initial doubts due to his preppy and somewhat nervous nature, Joe's journey in caving turned into a tale of persistent excellence. By the age of 18, he had overcome his apprehensions, and in his late 20s, he earned international recognition for his strength, caving skills, leadership, and irreverent sense of humor. Throughout his life, Joe passionately explored hundreds of caves in the US and Mexico, contributing significantly to cave surveys. Notable achievements include leading the exploration of Pau de Montemayor, turning it into the deepest cave in northern Mexico at 1,689 feet. He was a crucial member of the Cueva Cheve project, one of the world's deepest caves. Joe also played a key role in the exploration of Mexico's Cueva de la Puente, extending its length to over 8 kilometers, defying previous expectations. Beyond his adventures, Joe co-owned Gonzo Guano Gear, designing top-notch caving equipment that he thoroughly tested on his expeditions. With a degree in geography and environmental management, he worked for 13 years in karst hydrogeological, biological, and environmental research. In his final years, Joe's expertise led him to teach courses in vertical and rescue techniques. He left behind a legacy embraced by his companion and business partner, Rebecca Jones, his brother Marvin Ivy, sister-in-law Christy Ivy, niece Ashley Ivy, and a vast international family of cavers who admired and respected him. Joe Ivy's story is one of triumph, passion, and the pursuit of the extraordinary underground world. The 09 Well. 09 Well stands as a classic cave in the heart of Texas, offering a thrilling adventure for those equipped with a wetsuit and skilled in rope techniques. Plunging 100 meters into the earth, this multi-drop cave holds more than just natural wonders. It carries the echoes of history. Once a pivotal stop on the Ozana-San Angelo stagecoach line and frequented during the cattle drives between Mexico and Kansas City, 09 Well bears witness to a bygone era. Even today, a windmill draws water from the depths of the cave, connecting the present to its historical roots. Managed by TCMA for the University Land System, 09 Well has a special significance. Access is restricted to TCMA members for management or research-related trips, but recreational visits can be arranged with prior coordination. To embark on this subterranean journey, a formal request process is in place. Prospective adventurers should contact the cave manager well in advance of their planned trips. Descending into the 09 Well is not just a physical descent, it's a plunge into history and geological marvels. Reaching around 100 meters in depth, the well boasts a series of drops. From the initial 127 descent at the entrance, the downstream section presents 5 more rope drops leading to a sump. In the dome above the sump, Joe Ivy, a fearless explorer, spotted what seemed to be an infeeder in the ceiling, a potential passage to more undiscovered cave wonders. In March 2000, Joe Ivy, accompanied by Tim Stitch, who was an experienced and seasoned caver with a wealth of cave knowledge, set their sights on a bold climb up the dome, ready to unravel the mysteries hidden within the depths of 09 Well. So they set up the Aid Climb. Now, climbing the well was a real adventure for Joe and Tim. They used a cordless hammer drill and some gear to keep them safe, but what made their climb special was the self-belay system. Here's how it worked. Joe drilled and secured 2 bolts at the start of the climb. Then he attached something called a Kong slide to them. This slide thing is like a small metal plate with holes. They threaded the rope through these holes in a way that created some cool friction. The slide's job was to turn their 9mm static rope into a dynamic system. Normally, the rope stays put, but if someone falls, it can slip through the slide and soak up the energy of the fall. Pretty smart, right? And so, Joe and Tim went up. The rope connected to the slide went through the protection and down to them. The lead climber's tool, called an ascender, was used to connect to the rope. It helped adjust the length of the rope, which is something usually done by the person holding the rope, but they made it work differently. During their first climb, both Joe and Tim had some falls, but the setup handled it like a champ. The falls were about 13 feet on average, slide dancing included. Tim mentioned that in his fall, there was about 22 feet of rope below the top piece, making his fall less intense. They used a special protection gadget called a Climb Tech Removable Bolt, or RB. These are like reusable hooks that go into the holes they drill. Joe and Tim tried different sizes, both 3/8 of an inch and 1/2 inch RBs, but had a bit of a surprise when the 1/2 inch RB unexpectedly pulled during Tim's fall. Joe also had a fall on a 3/8 inch piece, thinking he placed it not so great. It's tough to keep these RBs clean from water and mud, which messes with how well they work. After their first trip, they decided to stick with the 3/8 inch ones, ditching the bigger size. Climbing in the well was like a mix of using some fancy gear, taking tumbles, and dancing with ropes and bolts. Joe and Tim made their climb an exciting adventure, leaving us all wondering what's next. The day of the accident. Joe and Tim dedicated 5 trips to tackle the climb spread across 3 weekends. The last weekend, specifically on September 30th, marked a significant breakthrough. Joe and Tim entered the well in a company of 16 fellow cavers. They managed to clear a muddy section that had posed serious challenges on the second weekend. This mud was a real headache, making it super tough to handle their gear. As they approached the final stretch, about 50 meters off the ground, things improved. The mud reduced and they found themselves in what looked like a good rock. Joe, taking his usual role of setting up the slide rigging at the belay point, kicked off the climb. Making a solid 6 meters of progress, he descended to the fixed line below and rappelled back to the base. Hungry and thirsty, he announced his plan to grab a bite and a drink. While he took his break, other cavers from the trip visited the bottom room. Some were still there when Joe made his way down the standing line. Tim, on the other hand, got some tools and gear from Joe, including adjustable stirrup triers that Joe designed himself. Tim preferred these over the standard ones Joe had. He climbed up to the anchor for the fixed line, attached himself to the lead rope, and made the switch to the ascenders at the end of the rope coming down from Joe's last bolt. The rope had passed through a line of 3/8 inch bolts to Joe's last protection and bolt. At this part of the climb, they used 3-inch wedge and sleeve-type bolts. Tim was all set, attached to the lead rope, ready to continue where Joe left off. The climb was like a puzzle, with each piece falling into place as Joe and Tim pressed on, overcoming challenges and reaching new heights. But little did they know that things would soon take a turn for the worse. Tim placed 8 bolts as he ascended, reaching a point about 15 feet or 5 meters below their target passage. However, he ran into a challenge. He didn't have enough bolt hangers to complete the climb, and fatigue had taken its toll. At this point, Tim decided to descend. Setting 2 bolts to anchor the fixed line, Tim descended, removing hangers and carabiners from the bolts below. He handed over the bolting equipment and hardware to Joe, informing him that the belay rope might not reach the top of the climb. Joe, ready for the challenge, coiled an extra rope, attached it to his harness, and climbed up the fixed line. The accident. Tim was amazed at Joe's speed. He disappeared from view quickly. As Tim waited below, he could hear other cavers approaching and see the dim glow of Joe's headlamp far above. Then, about 30 to 45 minutes into Joe's ascent, Tim heard a scream, followed by a loud crash. He called out to Joe, but received no response. Joe's lights were no longer visible above. Despite past experiences of mud and rock falling on the climb, this was different, much louder. Tim sensed that something had gone wrong. If everything was okay, Joe would have said something. The eerie silence from Joe was unsettling. Tim shouted up multiple times, desperately hoping for a response, but there was only silence. This turn of events became terrifying for Tim, left wondering about Joe's safety and what had transpired up there in the depths of the climb. As Tim's shouts reached Sarah Springer, an approaching caver, she quickly grasped the urgency and informed Sean Vincent, another caver. Within seconds, Sean was on his way to the surface. Tim, still shouting for help, began to hear Joe's moans and attempts to speak. Sarah descended to Tim's location, and he swiftly geared up with ascending equipment, climbing the standing line. Joe's moans were unsettling, coming from a point well below where they had last climbed. When Tim finally saw Joe, he found him wedged within a slot above a muddy ramp they had discovered earlier. Joe's legs were slightly raised, his helmet missing, later found and put back on, and smears of blood marked the left wall. Joe repeatedly expressed difficulty breathing. He'd fallen 12 to 18 meters, hitting a steep sloping ledge on the left before wedging into the slot above the muddy ramp. Tim climbed above the slot and then down climbed to Joe from behind. It became apparent that Joe was not attached to any rope, posing a risk of slipping down the ramp and off of the wall. Tim promptly tied a quick overhand knot in the rope below him and secured Joe's harness to it. Concerned about Joe's injuries, Tim inquired, and Joe responded, "Can't breathe. Left arm messed up." Attempting to pull Joe through the slot, Tim grasped his right arm. Joe yelled in pain, but when asked about the other arm, he insisted, "Everything hurts. Do it anyway." With determination, Tim pulled Joe, instructing him to kick. Eventually, Joe came out of the slot and slid down onto the top of the muddy ramp. The uneven ledge there was barely large enough to sit on, making it challenging to lie prone. Tim reasoned that this spot was the best place to attend to Joe's injuries, as the alternative of passing him through the slot and rappelling immediately to the bottom seemed less suitable. Joe, still loudly expressing difficulty breathing, became the focus of Tim's attention as they faced the challenging situation together. Joe's harness, the one he used to ascend and descend, slid up around his chest, constricting his ribcage and essentially strangling him. Aware of the danger of removing Joe's harness due to the risk of him falling off the ledge, Tim faced a steep angle that prevented him from pulling Joe onto the ledge. With time running out, Tim decided to get Joe off the wall altogether. He noticed the weight on the rope below him, supported by two rocks jammed on top of the slot. Tim asked Sarah to transition him to a new vertical caving line, but she lacked the knowledge of how to change the ropes or rappel while being on the rope. Tim instructed her to keep climbing while he considered that he couldn't describe the changeover successfully. Leaving Joe, Tim climbed up out of the slot to meet Sarah, attempting to help her change over to his part of the rope. Unfortunately, the rope was deeply jammed between two choke stones, hindering Sarah's ascent. The rescue struggle. By this time, Joe's condition had deteriorated significantly. He had lost consciousness, though sporadic breathing continued. Despite the challenges, Sarah and Tim worked together to move Joe to the ledge, aiming to relieve the weight from his harness and allow him to breathe. However, Joe's body, covered in slick mud, made it challenging to grab anywhere but the harness, worsening his breathing. Facing this disaster, Tim maneuvered along the sides of the ledge, using his legs to pull Joe up temporarily, alleviating the weight on the harness. After some time, Joe began slipping down again into the lower position in the deadly slot. Realizing the futility of efforts to get him onto the ledge, Tim prepared to get Joe off the wall entirely. The rope needed to be removed from the choke stones and then passed through the back of the slot. At this point, it became painfully obvious that Joe had stopped breathing altogether. While administering CPR seemed challenging given Joe's awkward position, Tim and Sarah were 100% committed to getting him down. Tim guided Joe down the muddy ramp, frequently pulling his legs out from under him and getting him unstuck. Eventually, Joe slid out, and Tim rappelled with Joe to the base of the wall. At the bottom, Tim urgently searched for a knife to cut Joe's harness off. Calls for assistance had gone out to cavers in central Texas around 11 p.m. on September 30th, and the rescue team, including Tim Comer, James Davis, Rod Dennison, Tommy Gillis, Monty Strange, Charlie Savas, and Frank Delgado worked together during the entirety of the rescue attempt. Despite Tim's efforts to get Joe's harness off, it became apparent that Joe had likely died. CPR was attempted, but it proved futile. The rescue team faced the significant challenge of getting Joe's body out of the cave, moving it up to the second drop before taking a break around 3 a.m. on October 1st. Trained cave rescue personnel, led by John Green, finished the recovery up around noon. The exact cause of Joe's fall at the top of the climb remains unknown. It's speculated that 1 or possibly 2 anchors were placed before his fall. The muddy cave environment presented extreme challenges, and problems with the spring-loaded devices used in the bolt climb could have occurred. Joe's belay system suffered a severe shock load during the fall, causing the ascender to cut through the ropes. The use of a 9mm static caving rope instead of the more typical 10mm or 11mm dynamic rope reduced the system's ability to absorb the shock. Investigators believe that Joe had moved the slide belay device closer to the top of the climb, decreasing the rope length and intensifying the shock load in the belay system. The choice of a stronger rope might have made a crucial difference in the outcome of the climb. Now, if you thought that was sad, wait until I tell you the tragic reality of a young boy who endured almost 26 hours in such a nightmare with very little hope of surviving. Morris Bateslot, aged 15, lived with his brother Donald in a Methodist children's home in Cleveland, Ohio. They'd been in foster care most of their lives after their parents divorced in 1955. Although their parents tried to look after them, the boys seldom saw them except on rare occasions. Despite this, Morris and Donald shared a strong bond and dreamed of starting a company and families of their own someday. Donald was both a father figure and a friend to Morris. They loved going on adventures together, especially to a nearby cave called Wildcat Cave. Morris started smoking at 13 and felt that nicotine helped him handle the stress of living in the children's home. Smoking became a way for him to connect more with Donald, even though it was against the rules at the Methodist children's home. Morris had been caught smoking more than a few times by teachers, and he was warned that one more time would get him kicked out. Morris figured that if he smoked with his friends inside the nearby Wildcat Cave, a cave that was just a few miles away from the Methodist children's home, the teachers couldn't blame only him. So he gave it a shot, bringing along his buddies for a smoke. To his relief, the plan worked perfectly, but when they were getting out, he nearly lost his way. Thankfully, his flashlight saved him from serious trouble. Now, this scary experience made him reconsider ever going back to the cave again. Now, I know what you're thinking. What does the Wildcat Cave even look like? This cave sits beneath a sandstone bluff. Its entrance is about 15 feet wide and 4 feet tall, leading to a narrow tunnel that stretches roughly 80 feet before expanding into a large chamber. The area around the cave is popular with locals, especially during warmer months, but its haunting history and eerie stories scare many away. This cave has a rich past, serving as a hideout for criminals and a refuge for escaped slaves on their way to Canada. Its twisting passages, steep drops, sharp formations, flowing water, and chilling temperatures present life-threatening hazards. Given these dangers and his own first harrowing experience in the cave, where he was almost lost, Morris opted to seek out safer places to smoke other than the cave. But this wouldn't last for long. Doomsday. On October 5th, 1965, Morris and 16 others from the children's home, along with 3 teachers, were sent to visit Schönbrunn village. However, a flat tire disrupted their plans, forcing a change of destination to the nearby Wildcat Cave. Morris was shocked, but thrilled at the news, instantly thinking about sneaking off for a smoke inside the cave with his friends. The entire group shared the same idea, buzzing with excitement as they parked near the cave. The teacher noticed the sudden burst of energy among the boys and grew suspicious, deciding to keep a closer eye on them as they disembarked. Leading the way up the rocky cliffs toward the cave, Morris felt a mix of nervousness and anticipation. Soon, one of his friends spotted the entrance and called out, gathering everybody at the cave's mouth, which loomed ominously like a dark, jagged maw. But what they didn't notice was that soon, the adventure would take an unexpected turn. Morris and his friends ducked into the cave, crawling headfirst into the narrow tunnel. The main passage stretched 80 feet to a large chamber, rumored to be part of the Underground Railroad. About 60 feet in and 35 feet below the surface, they reached a critical point where the tunnel met another. Here, they squeezed through a tight 12-inch gap narrowed by a leaning boulder. Morris, having been here before, confidently led the way. Though he didn't remember every twist and turn, he had a good sense of the route up to the intersection. After maneuvering through the choke point, however, Morris became disoriented in the darkness. He managed to find the tunnel that led to the large chamber and continued crawling. Then, a few feet in, the tunnel sloped downhill sharply, and he didn't recall that from the last time he was there, but he shrugged it off and thought maybe he just wasn't remembering this part correctly. Unfortunately, it wasn't Morris's memory that was wrong. It was the turn he made. It was the wrong turn that would have deadly repercussions. The wrong turn. Instead of following the main tunnel straight ahead past the choke point, he veered left into a narrow crevice. This passage sloped downwards at 15 degrees, with walls that progressively constricted the further he advanced. As Morris reached the end of the crevice and saw that it led nowhere, panic set in. He attempted to reverse, but found one arm trapped under his body, leaving him without the strength to push upwards against gravity. At this point, Morris was gripped by terror. Each sharp edge of the rocky tunnel had hurt him as he squeezed through. His heart pounded furiously, echoing the claustrophobic fear that now consumed his soul. Desperate for daylight and freedom, Morris found himself trapped almost upside down, his situation growing dire as blood rushed straight to his head. Panic grew when a big rock moved behind him, locking him in even tighter. Trapped and unable to see, Morris didn't understand how the rock had shifted, but he knew that it was bad. Trying to move only made him get stuck more, the rock holding him tighter with each twist and turn. Desperate, Morris let out all of his breath, hoping to make himself small enough to get free. But it didn't work. Now, angled downward at a precarious 45 degrees, he was stuck in a crevice barely wider than a clothes dryer's opening. He found that he couldn't move at all. His shouts for help didn't go anywhere. They just echoed back at him in the empty, tight space. As minutes turned to what felt like forever, Morris couldn't move, only his legs showing. He felt more and more scared as time passed. He was lost in a far-off part of the cave, a place too narrow and twisty for anyone to reach easily. Lying there, Morris thought about all the choices that had led him here. He prayed his friends would find a way through the tight tunnels to save him. But in the dark, his hope was fading fast. The struggle begins. Realizing that their friend was nowhere to be seen and maybe trapped inside the cave, Morris's friends ran to tell their teachers. One of the teachers hurried back to Wildcat Cave with the group. At the crevice's opening, he took off his belt and made a loop, trying to lasso Morris's feet. With a tug, Morris began to rise, but the belt snapped and he fell back, now even more tightly wedged. Realizing the danger, they left to call the fire department. When the firefighters arrived, they tried to loop a rope around Morris's leg, but they only managed to pull his pants down. Then they attempted to snag his jacket with a hook, but it tore right through. With his clothes ripped and still stuck, Morris faced a bleak situation as emergency crews set up lights and heaters to ease his discomfort. Reality slowly sank in. If he stayed stuck after dark, the cold could become deadly. As news spread, the area filled with rescuers, reporters, and locals offering help. Volunteers brought food and coffee to keep spirits up. Down in the crevice, Morris remained unaware that he had become a national headline by dinner time. Despite several failed attempts, rescuers remained determined to free Morris. They enlisted the help of the media, spreading the word that they needed people of small stature at Hinckley Reservation. Locals, including a petite nurse nicknamed Pinky, rushed to the scene after hearing the plea for help. Pinky, barely over 5 feet tall and weighing just 80 pounds, bravely volunteered to assist. With ropes tied to her legs for safety, she navigated the tight passages to reach Morris. However, the plan hit a snag. Her small size made it impossible for her to reach him or pull him out. Though Pinky couldn't rescue him, she stayed by Morris's side, offering comfort during his ordeal. Outside the cave, Curtis Peck, an experienced caver, arrived to offer his expertise. After assessing the situation, Curtis proposed using a pulley system to aid in the rescue. With the pulley secured to the cave ceiling, rescuers tried again to pull Morris free, but he remained stubbornly stuck. Despite the setback, rescuers noted Morris's surprising calmness throughout the ordeal, a stark contrast to the dire situation that he was in. The rescue effort. Throughout the long night, rescuers took turns sitting at the crevice's edge, engaging Morris in conversation to keep his spirits up and prevent him from losing consciousness. They asked questions and shared stories, a vital lifeline that kept Morris from succumbing to despair or exhaustion. At around 11 o'clock that night, Morris's family finally showed up at Hinckley Reservation. They would have been there much sooner, but they didn't find out until they heard a radio report. As local attempts to extract Morris faltered, the situation grew increasingly dire, prompting a call to the National Speleological Society. Known for their expertise in cave rescues, the NSS had a strong track record, though not every operation ended successfully. However, their involvement brought a glimmer of hope, underscoring their reputation for handling complex cave rescues effectively. Despite the challenging conditions, the local emergency teams were commended for their approach. They understood that the path that trapped Morris was also the only viable exit, reaffirming that pulling him out remained the best strategy. The challenge was finding someone small and strong enough to navigate the tight space and make a significant impact on the rescue efforts. In a small town just north of Hinckley, a father heard about the cave rescue on the radio for the first time. Realizing his sons might help, he quickly turned his car around and rushed home. Bursting through the door, he told his boys, Mike and Jeffrey, to get in the car. They were going to try and help. Could they be the chosen angels to solve this dire situation? Mike and Jerry, both skilled Boy Scouts, knew about survival but had never faced a challenge like this. Their dad believed they could make a difference, even without any experience in cave rescues. They arrived as the situation was becoming desperate. Morris had started to lose consciousness, and rescuers had to pump oxygen down to him to keep him awake. Time was running out. Jerry, being smaller, was chosen to go down first. Despite his father's belief in him, Jerry was scared. He hesitated at the cave's entrance, his heart pounding. But after some encouragement, he found the courage to descend towards Morris. Jerry made it further down than anyone else had. He tried to loop a rope around Morris, but couldn't manage it. As he struggled, his fear grew. Feeling overwhelmed and close to panicking, Jerry had no choice but to retreat. His attempt, though unsuccessful, was a brave effort to save Morris. But as he climbed out of the crevice, the weight of what he couldn't do hung heavy upon him, like the boulders that surrounded him. Mike, a bit older and more experienced than Jerry, was chosen for the difficult task in the cave because he was about the same size as Morris and could handle the stress better. He squeezed into the narrow crevice with ropes tied to him. 2 ropes were attached to his legs for safety, and he held 2 more to secure Morris. The rescue. As Mike moved closer to Morris, the cave walls got tighter. Morris was stuck in a part of the cave only 10 inches wide. Mike had to lie on his side, using one arm to move forward because the space was so cramped. When Mike reached Morris, he introduced himself and started figuring out how to use a new strap system designed by firefighters. This system was supposed to help pull Morris out safely. Outside, a man named Curtis, who knew a lot about caves and machinery, suggested using grease to make it easier to move Morris. They tried it, and although it made things slippery, it helped a little. Mike struggled to position the ropes properly under Morris's leg. After several tries, they made a bit of progress, but the ropes kept slipping. Morris, feeling desperate and scared, asked if there was anything he could do to help. Thankfully, they managed to get the straps around him properly this time. After adjusting the straps, Mike signaled the rescuers to start pulling. Morris moved slightly, but got stuck again. Curtis suggested sliding a greased board under Morris to help pull him out. This worked, and Morris finally began to move more freely. The rescue was slow, and each pull only moved Morris a few inches. After being trapped for 26 hours, Morris was finally freed from Wildcat Cave. When he was close enough to reach, a rescuer grabbed his leg and helped him to safety. Completely exhausted, Morris collapsed and was comforted by the rescue team as he cried. The rescuers, who had become emotionally invested throughout the night, felt a deep connection to Morris, who remained courageous and calm throughout the ordeal. When he was safely out, it felt as if everybody had rescued their own child. The crowd outside erupted in cheers when Morris was confirmed free. Despite his ordeal, Morris had to be carried out on a backboard by EMTs, maneuvering through the cave to an awaiting ambulance. The local police cleared the roads to the hospital to expedite his transport. Surprisingly, at the hospital, Morris appeared lucid and relaxed, suffering only minor injuries and dehydration. Morris was primarily hungry and exhausted after the ordeal. Once in the hospital, he devoured a large meal and rested extensively. Speaking to reporters from his hospital bed, he recounted his terrifying experience and his previous encounter with the cave last summer. Despite his calm demeanor, Morris confessed to feeling terrified and at times resigned to his fate. Shortly after his rescue, the Park Service took drastic measures to prevent future incidents by filling Wildcat Cave with dynamite and sealing it permanently with concrete. This rapid response underscored the severity of the incident and the determination to prevent similar situations. So here's a question for you. What's the most adventurous place you'd dare to explore? And if you were in Morris's shoes, what creative escape plan would you devise? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more thrilling stories and adventures. And I'll see you in the next episode.